Well, good morning, everyone. Welcome. So glad to have you all here today for Fall Formation Day 2016. My name is Deacon Mickey Friesen. I'm the director of the Center for Mission, and I'm serving as the chair of the formation planning team for today and throughout the next year. Today we're doing something that in some ways is very familiar to us, and yet there's something a bit new about this day. It's familiar in the sense that for more than 35 years we have been gathering as parish leaders to pray together, to study, to reflect on our call to ministry, to think about our practice and consider our hopes and our challenges in being leaders in parish life. It's new in the sense that our planning process has broadened a bit over the last year. We hope that we will draw on what has been the best about these days and be dynamic enough to represent us and to serve the current needs and situation of parish leaders in this archdiocese. So beginning last year, we formed a planning team that was actually a broader representation of various leadership bodies here in the archdiocese, including ministry associations and archdiocesan offices, and other Catholic institutions that have a vested interest in serving the development and growth of us as parish leaders. During the time of all the intense crisis over the last year, we were able to keep planning. At one time, we called ourselves the Coalition of the Willing, to continue to plan. And we were able to spend a whole year on the theme of discipleship. What does it mean to be intentional about forming disciples in our parishes, and what does it mean about sending disciples, missionary disciples? And the response from the formation days over the last year, we were just so encouraged by it, and we've decided to continue in this fashion going forward. We're going to continue to host 2 formation days in the fall and in the spring. And our intent is to really focus on one theme over a whole year, and at the spring really looking at it from the perspective of us in terms of pastoral life and growth of our communities, and the fall looking at the theme from the perspective of what does it mean to be a sent church, a mission church, and our call of sending disciples forth. We hope that these days will be days to inspire us, that they can inform us. There'll be days of fellowship for us to get reacquainted and meet one another again, as colleagues and friends. But it also might be a day to equip us in terms of our practice and going forth. And we hope that it might also inform what you do when you leave here, that you can bring it into your own particular concerns, your own ministry areas, and maybe to inform further discussion at various levels of parish life. So let me just tell you a little something about the context for how we discerned the theme for today and really throughout for the next year. When we asked the participants from last year what was it that they wanted to think about doing for the future formation days, it seemed like the common response was something like this. He said, "We just want to do more of that." Whatever that was last year. So we actually went back and looked at that, and one of the things that we discovered is that there were some profound questions asked for us as a church, and one in particular, when last spring we had Bishop Frank Caggiano who came, and he made the point that it's not so important to get the answers correct, we need to learn how to get the questions right, to name the questions right. And one of the questions that he asked that got us our attention went like this. He said, "Are our parish communities credible places where Jesus can be encountered and loved, felt, and passed on? Or are our communities tired and mediocre?" And so that got us thinking about this question about a credible community. It's a word with many layers of meaning. How are we to build or to rebuild a credible community of faith and witness? How are we relevant or not to those on the margins or those who are searching or just uninterested? And what is the role of parish leaders in animating and organizing such a parish community? And we decided that this question seems very timely for us as an archdiocese. And so today we begin to open up this question for us to ponder and study and look at, to pray about, what does it mean to build a credible community and a credible witness to our faith? So we're very grateful today to be here at St. John Neumann, and I'd like to invite the pastor, Father Doug Ebert, to come and welcome us before we pray today.
Thank you. And it is a privilege on behalf of the St. John Neumann Parish community to have you all here. Now please stand as we sing together.
We'll sing the odd verses in English and the even verses in Spanish. Odd verses English, even Spanish.
We walk by faith and not by sight. No gracious words we hear from Him who spoke as none spoke, but we believe in Him. Sus llagas no podrás tocar, ni ir de Cristo en pos, en su palabra de confiar, gritar Señor mi Dios. And then, O Lord, God unbelief, and may our faith abound, to call on you when you are near, and seek where you are found. La vida fiel ha de cesar, veremos el amor, y así por siempre contemplar tu eterno resplandor. We walk by faith and not by sight. No gracious words we hear from Him who spoke as none spoke, but we believe in Him.
Let us pray. Come to us, Holy Spirit, and fill our hearts with the fire of your love. Remain with us and enlighten our hearts. Give us light and strength to learn of your will and to make it our own and to live it in our lives. Guide us by your wisdom. Support us by your power. Unite us to yourself in the bond of love and keep us faithful to all that is true. You desire justice for all. Enable us to uphold the rights of others. Do not allow us to be misled by ignorance or corrupted by fear or favor. May everything we do begin with your inspiration and continue with your help, so that all our prayers and works may begin in you, be pleasing to you, and bring the reward promised to good and faithful servants. For you live and reign in glory with the Father and the Son, one God, forever and ever.
Amen. Please be seated. So on Holy Thursday of this year, we woke up to the news that Archbishop Bernard Hebda would be our new archbishop. And I understand no one was more surprised than him. And yet, in a way, he was in a special position to begin because he helped to prepare the way for a new leader by leading us through some dark times and facilitating listening sessions to learn about us, our strengths and our needs. I remember when we did this as a diocesan staff, I think we were the guinea pigs for the listening sessions. And at the end, one of the questions was, what are the qualities that you wanted in an archbishop? And I can't remember who said it, but one of our remarks said, geez, I think who you want is Jesus Christ to be the archbishop. But Archbishop Hebda didn't miss a beat. He says, well, don't you think we should expect that from our leaders? That they should reflect Jesus Christ? That they be able to lead us to Christ? And then someone said, okay, can we just have someone like you then, Archbishop? Since being installed, I know that Archbishop Hebda has been doing a lot of visiting and getting to know us as a local church. And sometimes they were actually scheduled visits. He has a way of getting around. Today we have this opportunity to meet him and meet us, to listen, to pray together. He's going to be helping us to open up this theme for the year on building a credible community, what it might mean for us as parish leaders and as an archdiocese. And when I asked Archbishop Hebda, is there anything I should highlight about your background? He just said, good luck. So I say the same to you, good luck, Archbishop. And welcome, please, Archbishop Hebda.
Remind me never to be introduced by Deacon Mickey again. Actually, as he was setting forth the theme for the day, he very much stole a lot of my thunder. We could probably just have lunch right now. But I am grateful for this opportunity to really thank you not only for your wonderful work, your wonderful leadership in our parishes, but also to thank you for your presence here today, for taking the time out of busy schedules to be here. I hope that you won't be disappointed or think that it wasn't a good use of your time. There is a slightly different format and different focus for the morning that we're celebrating today. Even though Deacon Mickey was able to talk about the wonderful planning that's going on, for a whole host of reasons, nothing was really planned for today. But at the same time, we recognize that after we had that very positive gathering last year, and we were all trying to put our finger on what made it such a positive experience, we knew that we didn't want to lose that momentum. And so in some ways today I'm a placeholder here. It was an opportunity for us to continue meeting, to continue praying, and to really continue as best we can that reflection that began when we gathered last April. I can give you some hope though as well, because Bishop Cajano has already agreed to be back this spring. And he very much desires to continue the discussion that he began last year. And I'm happy kind of to be his warm-up act. But really, I think there's a providential advantage here today too, because it gives us a chance to speak a little bit about context. How is it that we add some local context to that discussion that's taking place not only in this great church of St. Paul in Minneapolis, but really across the United States? So when Bishop Cajano was here last year, he could have spoken really to anybody anywhere in the United States. When Father White and Tom Corcoran were here, presentations they could give anywhere in the United States and maybe even beyond. So in some ways, I think we have to take this moment, profit from this moment, to speak a little bit about local context for what it is that's going on in this local church and how it is that we're going to be able to build. In some ways, I don't know what it was like in your family, but whenever we were having company, my mother would gather the 4 kids in the kitchen beforehand and give us a whole list of instructions. But it was that family chat that gave us some idea of parameters, what it is that we can anticipate. And so today, instead of it being a wonderful presentation from a nationally known speaker, it's an opportunity for us to have a little bit of a family chat before the company arrives. As I mentioned, I'm so grateful to you for your leadership in our parishes, but even in our diocese. I've already come to appreciate how much we rely on you, our parish leaders, not just to make sure that everything works in the parish, but as we strive to chart a course for the Archdiocese. I'm delighted that after just a few months, so many of your faces are so familiar to me, because I see you involved in so many different aspects of the life of this local church, and I think that's a good thing. I've really been delighted to have the opportunity as of late, now I know I got a late start, but to get around to our parishes, because I really believe that it's in the parish that the rubber hits the road, where we really get a sense of the local church. Last year, as many of you know, as I was serving as administrator, I was traveling back and forth to New Jersey. The obligations that I had in Newark, most of them on weekends, prevented me from spending very much time in our parishes. I felt privileged to be able to do so much of the office work, but I didn't have the chance to really appreciate what was going on in our parishes. When I was asked to give an account of the health of this archdiocese as we were looking forward to the appointment of a new leader, I realized that even after I had a grasp of most of the facts and figures, my understanding was severely flawed because I hadn't had the opportunity to spend so much time with you in our parishes. It's in the parish that you can take the temperature or the pulse of the local church. Strong parishes are both a sign of a healthy church and the building blocks of a healthy church. So what it is that you're doing at the parish level is incredibly important. Gives me a sense for where we are, but it also gives me hope knowing that your parishes and your investment in the parish, your generous service in the parish, is helping us to build a healthier church here in the Archdiocese. When I had the opportunity to be with you last spring, I was very much impressed by your energy and by your commitment to making sure that your parishes were vibrant. There was a real openness to new ideas. Certainly, as you listened to Michael White and Tom Corcoran, certainly that openness that you expressed as you listened to Bishop Cajano, and I know in my discussions with him that he was really energized, feeding off of the energy that you evidenced, your excitement. It was a moment it was an excitement that was palpable. I appreciated as well your attentiveness to the presentation of Dr. Ospino as well as he spoke about our multicultural church. You might remember that it was just a few weeks after I had been named Archbishop. And for me at that moment, it was just what the doctor ordered. I was somewhat overwhelmed by the complexity of our Archdiocese. But I had a real sense that day, a deep sense of being blessed to be a part of this church. I've experienced that with our priests as well. But I can tell you that that day at Pax Christi was the first time that I remember really thanking the Lord for bringing me here. I remember thinking that I knew that I didn't have the answers for how to move the Archdiocese forward. But as I looked around the church that day, I had the conviction that the Lord would make himself known to me through you, and that he had already blessed me and this local church with the resources that we need to heal, to rebuild, to celebrate, and to serve. When I was a child, one of my favorite books, you're going to be surprised by this, I really liked Where the Wild Things Are, but we're not going to talk about that. But one of my favorite books, because the pictures were so wonderful, and any of you who are around my age will remember, was the children's Bible. The pictures were magnificent, and the stories were stories that captured the attention of a young child. And I remember my parents would often read to us at night stories from that children's Bible. And we loved in particular, 3 boys, 1 girl, we loved the stories from the Old Testament. Maybe there was a little bit more action, maybe a few more battles. But one of the stories that always captured my imagination was that of Noah and the ark. And I found myself as a child reflecting on how it is that everything that the world needed was on that ark. On that day last April, at the Church of Pax Christi reminded me of that ark. Maybe it was the wood. But God, knowing just what we needed, had packed into the ark everything that we might need to withstand the storm and to rebuild. I'm not quite as clever as Noah, so the Lord had blessed me by not limiting me to a pair of each species. Youth ministers, liturgists, administrators, religious educators, huh? We don't want to talk about you propagating either, huh? But I looked around and I had that sense that somehow God had given us everything that we needed to move forward. And I felt very blessed to be a part of that, and that the voyage that was ahead of us wasn't nearly as scary. Since that time, as we've seen the deluge dissipate to maybe a steady rain or on days a drizzle, I have continued to send out the doves to see if we're through the storm and beyond the flood. And there are days when I look forward to that opportunity when we might find some dry land. We're not there yet, but I'm hopeful and confident that we're getting there. We're making progress. In the meantime, the ark can get a little smelly. The space can feel a little cramped. We can even get a little seasick and our stomachs a little queasy. But I'm confident that we're going to make it. Not because of my skill as a navigator, but because of God's providential care and His love for you, His church. Certainly, there are those temptations, I think, to imagine what the church is going to be like once we get over this hump. And to think that in some ways this is a blip on the screen. It's an anomaly in the life of a strong church. But I think that in some ways we have to also be able to see this moment as being formative of the church, formative for us and the ministry that we embrace. And it's in that way that I think that what we want to talk about today is appropriate for Fall Formation Day. Because the Lord in some ways has reset the agenda. He's given us a somewhat different playing field than we had just a few years back. But in all of it, He's showing to us His providential love, His care for us. So what are the blessings that come from this experience? And how do they prepare us for moving forward to be that credible community that Deacon Mickey spoke about? If I had a crystal ball, and I don't, but what I would see or imagine or foresee is that this experience is going to guarantee that we're a more collaborative church. That we have to certainly put our heads together to discern where it is that God is calling us to serve. That we have to work together to prioritize what's important. What are the first steps that we need to take? They're baby steps, but we need to be careful in our discernment of moving forward. And I think that part of that is necessarily going to involve collaboration, putting our heads together in that process of discernment. Have you noticed recently how often Pope Francis has spoken about discernment? Now, you expect that a little bit. He's a Jesuit, after all, huh? But he's really, even as he's talking about who he's looking for as leaders in the church, and he's speaking mostly about bishops and priests, but it applies to all of us in ministry as well. He's saying that the quality that we need to look for is an ability to discern. So it's not somebody that knows everything. It's not somebody that already has a set game plan in mind. It's someone who's going to be able to discern the presence of the Holy Spirit, God's will in the difficult situations or the joyful situations that we find ourselves in. I think in some ways, even though I had had a little bit of experience here in the Archdiocese before that Holy Thursday or before the Feast of Our Lady of Fatima when I was installed, I nonetheless come here very much as a stranger to the experience of this local church. And by necessity, I find myself in need of your help. You're the people that know the story. You're the family members who have been knitting this story together for generations. And so in naming somebody here who really wasn't from here, wasn't part of this story, was a distant relative, in some ways, the Lord and the Holy Father made it necessary that we would have to collaborate. I have a need for your help. I'm confident that God's going to be present to me, not by blessing me with infused knowledge, but by making his presence known through you, through the leaders of this church. I think that we're already seeing some impact at 226 Summit Avenue, for example. The process of our daily life there is already one that involves great collaboration. And that started before I ever got here. So I think it's the situation that brings that to bear. Every Wednesday, like clockwork, I gather around a table with leaders from our diocesan leadership, our diocesan administrative leadership. And I have that opportunity to hear their insights, not just in their particular areas. It's not just a reporting on what they're doing, but it's that opportunity, as best we can, to discern where it is that God is calling us to move forward. It's a wonderful opportunity for me to be not only supported, but also to be challenged. It's a time where we often have the most unusual people calling forth and saying, this is where God is calling us to move. Isn't this what we're called to do by our Catholic values? And sometimes that comes from a lawyer. Doesn't always come from a priest or a pastoral leader. But it's a wonderful opportunity to see how it is that if we open ourselves up to collaboration, the Lord makes his presence known. And it's not just around that table on Wednesday afternoons. I've really been nourished and nurtured by the experience that I've had with the consultative bodies in the Archdiocese. So whether we're talking about our corporate board, whether we're talking about our finance council, whether we're talking about our priest council, really a college of deans, whether we're talking about the consultors. In each of those opportunities to consult, we've been able to see how it is that the Lord can make himself known and give us some indication of where's the next step, where's the next place where we plant our archdiocesan foot. I have a feeling that that same thing is going to be true at the parish level as well. How urgent it is that we bring together the best minds, people who are committed to our church, committed to the sharing of our faith, and that we engage in a collective resolution of our situation. As I mentioned, the floodwaters might be subsiding, but we still haven't seen the dry land. And we're going to face some of those challenges, not just at the diocesan level, but at the parish level. And I think that the Lord is calling us to really embrace wholeheartedly a path of collaboration. Just to give you one little inkling of how that happens, many of you see the policies, a few new policies that have come forth from the Archdiocese. And we're trying to make sure that they're not just impositions. We're really assisted by Janelle Rasmussen. I don't know how many of you have had the chance to meet her yet, who's working with Tim O'Malley and really helping us to actuate, to follow through on the commitments we made with Ramsey County. But one of the things in setting forth those policies, there's been a real attentiveness to trying to get good input. And so Janelle and Tim and Father Tix from our Presbyteral Council put together a little working group of different sectors of our diocese who give first feedback on a policy, who help to construct it. And then once we have something that looks like a workable draft that I've shared as well with my staff, then we're also sharing it at priest council, presbyteral council. And it gives us an opportunity then to get a broader discussion. And it's often not just the priests who are there. We've also had a chance, just like we're meeting today with our parish leadership, I've had the opportunity on a number of occasions to meet with our priests. And we've been bringing up some of these things, trying as best we can to find a way in which we're able to find some common ground. Interesting for our priest council, you know, we never like meetings. Nobody likes meetings, But the members of our priest council have just voted to meet more frequently. Can you imagine? I'm almost doubting their Catholicity, But they have that sense that it's important that we have those opportunities to collaborate, to weigh in. We're doing that just in that very small forum of work with our priests. But we're already envisioning how it is that we might be able to do that on a much broader scale. So we've been talking, for example, about how it is that we're going to be able to resurrect the Archdiocesan Pastoral Council. Father Lakowitzer already has flowcharts in his mind about all of the commissions. I think there's a commission to set up commissions. But we're also talking about something I think that would be a little bit rarer, and that would be to do an Archdiocesan Synod. And it's a vehicle that the Church offers to us to be able to set a course for the local church. It's the way in which the Church envisions the bishop being able to draw on the resources of the local church, his priest collaborators, his lay collaborators, theologians, all of the people who make up this church to be able to establish priorities. And so we're at a little bit of a chicken and an egg question right now. Do we begin with the pastoral council and have the pastoral council help us to carry forth the synod? Or do we begin with the synod and have that set the parameters for a pastoral council? So if you have any thoughts on that, please feel free to share them with me. But we're anxious and urgent to be able to do that. And we're also looking for ways of how it is in that spirit of collaboration, also to collaborate with entities beyond the Archdiocesan pale as well. So some of the great things that are being done with our Catholic schools are happening with groups that are really outside of the Archdiocese. We have such great collaborators in Cisco or Aim Higher. We have such great collaborators in Catholic Charities or the Catholic Community Foundation. This morning I had a wonderful breakfast at Mount Zion Synagogue. I thought it was going to be a nice little breakfast of a dozen people from putting our heads together. And I go in and there are hundreds of people from different denominations, different faiths, who are all there to talk about how it is that we together might be able to be more effective in reaching out to the needs of the poor. We had 2 of our parishes represented this day. They made a point of telling me that we used to have 15 that were always involved. But trying to find ways, and that's just in St. Paul, but trying to find ways of collaborating even with those who are outside of the Archdiocese. So the first thing, if I looked in that crystal ball, it would be that we're going to be a more collaborative church. I also suspect that we're going to be a church that is substantially more humble. Part of it has to do with financial resources. Quite frankly, we're going to lack those financial resources as we come through bankruptcy that gave us a bit of a cushion before. Obviously, it's going to be very obvious when the Archdiocese moves from its post of privilege on Summit Avenue to the east side of St. Paul. We're going to be going from those wonderful eateries on Selby and Grand to the taquerias on 7th Street, But I'm glad there was some applause because I've already tried them and they're wonderful. But most especially, with that move, we're going to be in the midst of our brothers and sisters who are in need. And I suspect that it's not just a question of changing the optic, that we're going to find ourselves situated in a place where we're going to be more attentive, more sensitive to the needs of a different segment of our population, of our community. In some ways, the church is always attentive to the world around us. But I think in that move, we're going to be attentive in a new way. Maybe be more sensitive to issues of justice. Maybe more sensitive to the real needs of people in poverty. Since last summer, just a little story. Behind the chancery, there's a retaining wall, and then there are those woods. And since last summer, there's been a growing camp of people who've been living there. We just had last weekend, we had the permanent deacons and their wives, and we had the parents of our seminarians come through for receptions. And at the one for deacons, one of the wives said, "I don't know what you're cooking, but it smells wonderful. And I see the fire coming up from the woods." My suspicion it was laundry rather than lunch, but we won't go there. But I can tell you that each day as I leave my room and go down the steps to the chapel or to breakfast, I see every day all of the clothing that's hung up there in the woods. I see the people that are there. And it's just being visible in that way has caused me every day to think more often about what it is that we're doing to respond to the needs of these people. We'll speak a little bit more about that later too. But in terms of making us credible, we have to be responding to the real needs of the people around us. I think also, just in general, that the situation that we'll find ourselves in will make us much more reliant on God's providential care. Each day, we're going to be relying on what it is that God provides for us so that we can do His work. I suspect that crystal ball would also tell us that the church is not going to be only more humble, but more grateful as a result, more appreciative of the efforts of our co-workers in the vineyard, whether that be within the archdiocesan structure, whether that be in our parishes, whether that be in the community at large. That we're going to have to be grateful. We're seeing the limitations that are upon us. And yet when we see the Lord's work being done, it's going to place in all of our hearts a much greater gratitude. In some ways, I also think the situation is going to make us more agile, more able to move, to get out, as Pope Francis keeps calling us to do. Now, I know I'm one of those people that gains weight, loses weight, gains weight, loses weight, And I can tell you I'm much more agile when I weigh less. There was a time when I weighed less. And my memory is very long, so I remember, But in some ways, I think that as our archdiocese, if you can forgive the analogy, somehow or another we become a little bit more meager, a little bit thinner, a little bit smaller, that we're also going to be better poised to deal with all kinds of issues. And for us, I think that has to be something that gives us that opportunity to touch different people, to respond to different needs, and to be able to build that credibility in a new way. Ultimately, I think some of that downsizing that's going to be necessary in terms of structure is also going to help focus us more on the basics. Now, I suspect that all of you as leaders in our church have studied very carefully Pope Francis's documents that he's put forth in his pontificate. And certainly the lead document there, The Joy of the Gospel, really calls us to concentrate more and more on the core, on the kerygma, on those things that are most at the heart of who we are as Christians, as Catholic Christians. That's knowing of God's love, knowing that God has saved us, and knowing that he's going to be with us always. Pope Francis's teaching is that if we focus on that core, and we let go of some of the things that are more obscure, we have that opportunity not only to touch hearts that are waiting to understand things in an understandable way, but that are also, it gives us an opportunity to express some unity. We don't disagree about those things. And it gives us an opportunity to strengthen our core. And I think even though Pope Francis was talking about it in terms of the proclamation of the gospel, so to go forth proclaiming just the core of the gospel as that first step in leading people to Christ and building the church, I think it's true about the reproclamation of the gospel as well. Deacon Mickey had made reference to some of those listening sessions that we had. And those of you who were there will remember that one of the challenges that were most frequently mentioned had to do with people that have drifted away from the church, often family members who had drifted away from the church. For some, it was questions of anger. For others, it was just a drift. But we know that we need to reach out to those people who once sat next to us in the pew, as we continue to reach out to those who have never known Christ or never known how it is that Christ is present in the Catholic Church. But we know that we have to be able in some way to reach out to those who were baptized Catholics. And somehow, I think if we focus once again on the core of who we are, we have that opportunity of making some progress there. I also think that looking into that crystal ball, that the experience that we've had in recent years as a result of the sexual abuse of minors has made our church much more attuned and requires that our church be much more attuned to the needs of the young. We have to make sure that we're really convicted about the importance of sharing the faith with our young people in a way that's authentic. So we have to be looking for those ways. And I think that in some ways, even that sense of the experience that we've had of letting down kids is one that's going to help us to grow in our outreach. That was another one of those areas that we heard so often in the listening sessions. What are we doing? What is this church doing? What is the church around the United States doing to really pass on the faith to our young people? If I looked into that crystal ball, I think that we, having had this experience, can hope that we're going to be more attentive to the needs of our young. And at the same time, that same experience, I think, is going to make us more sensitive to those instances where we see abuse of office in the church. And that's not just in the area of sexual abuse, and certainly isn't limited to our priests and deacons. But it's something that in general, I think that we as the church, because of this experience that we've had, are going to be much more resistant to tolerating any kind of abuse of office. And I think that makes us a healthier church as well. As I look into that crystal ball, I also would think that our church is by necessity going to be more local than centralized? Part of it is because we have a smaller staff, smaller budget, but it's more than that as well. I think once again, taking a page from the playbook of Pope Francis, we see how he's really placed an emphasis on the local. So even as he's in Amoris Laetitia, as he talks about how it is that we're able to assist our couples, assist families in need, he's looking for solutions, and on the local level, he's calling together people who know a particular situation to be the ones who address it with the greatest of care. It's a beautiful subsidiarity. And that's not just for those huge questions, but I think that's also for the very way in which we're going to be church here in the Archdiocese of St. Paul and Minneapolis. There's a practical side to that, as I said, as our staff is smaller and our budget is smaller, but there's also that sense of how important it is that there be that responsibility at the local level for trying to come up with pastoral solutions that work. Now, in the midst of all of that, when we have that move to a decentralization, there's going to be a tension there for sure, because we always have to make sure that there's an essential unity that characterizes us as church. So we have to certainly have a unity of discipline. We have to have a unity of doctrine. But we can also appreciate how it is that each local community is going to be an expression of that unity. Well, back to those listening sessions, the number one strength that we always heard was the diversity of this local church. And people talked about diversity in all different kinds of ways. They talked about diversity of culture in terms and language. They talked about diversity in ecclesiology. I don't know what they meant by that, They talked about diversity in liturgical styles. So all of those kinds of things, it's a great diversity that we have in the Archdiocese, and we want to make sure that we're capitalizing on that. But we always have to make sure that we're doing it in a way where we all are able to be united at our core. And ultimately, if you ask me, what's going to help us to do that is if we're all focused on Christ. And so if we have our eyes trained on Christ, even when we're coming from all different perspectives, we're like the spokes in a wheel. We're somehow united because of our connection to Christ, because of our focus on Christ. And in that vision, that's where our parishes really take on a new importance and are highlighted again. In some ways, they really regain the pride of place. Now, all of you are so involved in parish life that you know that we have many parishes that are superb. We have great parishes. But nonetheless, we need to ask those questions that Deacon Mickey echoed from Bishop Cajano to us. What is it that we need to be doing to be really credible communities? How do we make sure that those parishes aren't self-referential, but that they're really going to be communities that are credible in proclaiming the kerygma, that core message of our faith, that message that came to us from Jesus himself? Are others from outside of our community going to be looking at our parishes and ever come up with that phrase, see how they love one another? That's ultimately what explains the growth of the church. It's when people see that that message that we're proclaiming is rendered evident in the way in which we live our lives, most especially in the way that we love one another, the way that we care for one another. Certainly, we have to work at that goal of unity, and that requires that we have a respect for the other, that we have an appreciation of diversity, even within our Catholic community. Now, I don't tell anybody that I ever read the Star Tribune, okay? But last week there was a great op-ed piece they were talking about the political situation that we're in, where we have discourse, where people aren't listening to one another. They just throw bombs. And one of the things that it talked about was how important it is, and this is my paraphrasing, that we not label people, how easy that is for us to do that, to say, well, they're this or they're that, and then we think we know everything about them. If we're going to build a unity, we have to stay away from those labels. I have a friend who's a brilliant he's a priest, but he's brilliant at marketing, and he runs an incredible soup kitchen in Lowell, Massachusetts, which is the poorest community in New England. And his fundraising stick is he gives out jars for coins, and it says on the labels are for jars. and then people that contribute are then given shirts with labels on them. Addict, drunk, all kinds of labels, ways in which we stereotype people and never get to see who they really are. In that same article in the Star Tribune, it said that one of the ways that we begin to break that down is by talking to one another, but by asking questions. How is it that, and I think these fora, something like a fall formation day, and today it's abbreviated, but you'll have that opportunity even at lunch, to ask those questions of one another so that we come to appreciate the richness of our diversity, but that we also come to recognize how it is that diversity is rooted in Christ. So we want to make sure that we're striving, that we're working. It can't be something that's just passive. It really has to be active. And you'll find that in your parishes as well. Now it's one of the byproducts of a very mobile society is today it's very common for people to find a parish that kind of fits them, that suits them. And so we might not have those same extreme tensions in a parish anymore, because people who aren't happy just leave and find some other place. But you're going to find some of that in every parish as well. And so part of your role as leaders in making your parish a credible community is being able to knit together that unity, of stimulating that discussion, of having that opportunity to listen to one another, describe what your experience is of the church. Pope Francis said that one of the things that really detracts from that keeps us from being a united community, or being that credible community, I don't think that's his phrase, that's Bishop Cajano's, but what keeps us from really expressing that unity is gossip. This is one of his quotes. He said, "Let each one ask him or herself today, do I increase harmony in my family, in my parish, in my community, or am I a gossip? Am I a cause of division or embarrassment?" Then he goes on to say, gossip does harm, gossip wounds. Before Christians open their mouths to gossip, they should bite their tongue. To bite one's tongue, this does us good because the tongue swells and can no longer speak, can no longer gossip. And then he asks the question, am I humble enough to patiently stitch up through sacrifice the open wounds in communion? So all of us, whatever our area is in ministry, we have to make sure that we're stitching at those wounds, that we're helping our brothers and sisters to do that as well, that we're bringing to bear what we can to that work of promoting communion in our parishes, which is ultimately going to help us with communion in the archdiocese as well. So if we're going to be a credible community, we're going to have to be a community that's united, and we certainly need some work there. We also have to be a community that's joyful, and I'll talk about that a little bit later if we have more time. But that's one of those things, and obviously we've endured some really challenging times as of late, and it's not surprising that we're often somber. But if we're going to be a credible community to the world, we have to be able to reflect that we know that central message of our faith, that we appreciate that God loves us, that He saved us, and that He's going to be with us always. And that there is a joy that has to come from that. I always love it that the missionaries of charity, I had a chance to work with them for many years, and many of you know them far better than I, but every year they require their sisters to go through, they do their annual retreats for sure, but they do 3 days where they focus on different aspects of missionary of charity life. And those of us who were in Rome, there are many communities of missionaries of charity, and the sisters always do this in August when the student priests are gone. So the only people that are there are the priests who actually work in Rome. And the sisters, they kind of lasso you to lead them in these 3 days, which most of us priests refer to as the 3 days of darkness. Have the sisters managed to commit you to this? But one of the things that they really focus on is how important it is. The mother understood that so clearly that if her sisters weren't joyful, they weren't going to be able to really fulfill their ministry, their call to ministry. And so we'll have a chance to reflect on that a little bit later, but how it is that we make sure that we're so conscious of God's love that there's a joy that ignites us, a joy that unites us, and a joy that will attract others. I spoke a little bit before about how important it is that if we're going to be united, if we're going to be joyful even, that we're going to have to be focused on Christ and His Word. I know many of my brother bishops will always end their meetings or anything that they're doing in a parish by trying to say, how does this relate to Jesus Christ? How is it that what we're doing relates to Jesus Christ? That has to be true not only on the archdiocesan level, whether that be mediating with an insurance company. Anything that we're doing has to in some way relate to Jesus Christ. And that's going to be true on the parish level as well. Certainly, if we're going to be that credible community that Bishop Cajano talks about, it's going to mean that our parishes also are going to be places of service. At the breakfast this morning with Interfaith Action of Greater St. Paul, they spoke about how their experience is that by bringing people together to serve, it naturally promotes not only respect and understanding, but the byproduct is unity as well. It's a natural experience. For us, as an organization, the more that we're focused on service, getting dirty, of really hands-on service, it's then that we're going to have that opportunity to build greater unity. But for us, unlike maybe some of our interfaith partners, there's another reason for that too. And that's that we know that the people whom we serve are Christ. And for us, with that kind of a realization, we recognize the imperative. We know that at the end of our days, Jesus is going to speak to us about when we've clothed the naked or fed the poor, because that's the way we related to Him. So for us, if we're going to be credible communities, we're going to have to be communities of service. It's that way in which we not only show others who we are and what we're about, but it's a way in which we're able to have that encounter with Christ in the poor, in the needy, that then enriches our understanding of who we are as a church. Then I'd also like to speak just a moment about how it is that a credible community also has to be a place of welcome, a place of hospitality. Pope Francis, who manages to capture these things with wonderful stories, spoke about a parish in Buenos Aires that was famous because of the parish secretary. And he said everybody in the city referred to her as the tarantula. So people were afraid to go to the parish because of what the tarantula would do. How important it is that we tame the tarantula in ourselves, that we make sure that that's not what we're about, but that we're really welcoming people. He also manages to capture, I think in a very concrete way, he says that a parish staff is not like border patrol. It's not to keep people out, right? That can't be the perspective. I had a very sad encounter with a woman in a parish this weekend who came, and she said it's very hard for her to speak to me because I was wearing a collar. But she spoke about how it is, and she was a victim of clerical abuse. And she said, I've managed to get over a lot of that, a lot of therapy. But she said, what I can't get over is the fact that I don't feel welcome in our parishes. She said, somehow or another, that because of what happened to me, I have a disease. That's how she feels. I don't know that that's actually the way in which she was treated, but that's the perception that's there. We have to make sure, if we're going to be credible communities, that we welcome all people. I had told her, I said, I really can't even begin to imagine that any priest or any lay ecclesial minister would project that she wasn't welcome. So wouldn't you know it, it's only been a few days since the weekend, and I've received a letter from one of her friends, a gentleman, who also was abused, and said, I've had the same experience. We need to talk about this. So our parishes have to be places that are inclusive, where all people feel welcome. Pope Francis tells us that we have to give priority precisely to those who feel most distant. He says this, it's about assuming missionary dynamism in order to reach everyone, putting first those who feel distant and the most vulnerable and forgotten people. It means opening the doors and letting Jesus go forth. Many times we keep Jesus closed inside the parishes with us, and we do not go out and we do not let him leave. Open the doors so he can go out, at least him. It is about a church which goes forth, a church which always goes forth. If we want to be a credible community, we have to be parishes in which Christ not only motivates what we do within our walls, but that Christ propels us to go forward with him in addressing those who are in need. We have to be places of inclusion if we're going to be credible. That doesn't belong just to that sense of inclusivity isn't something that just affects the pastor or the professional staff or even long-time volunteers. How important it is that we realize that we don't own the church, that we're servants of the church, that the church belongs to everyone. We have to look to see how it is that it's easy for it to happen, where we want to preserve our status, we want to preserve our position, rather than thinking about how is it that we prepare this community to continue to grow even when I'm gone? How is it that we can even step back to allow others to take on the responsibility that is theirs in virtue of baptism? How is it that we go about doing that? Pope Francis was speaking about this even in terms of our parish councils and finance councils, saying how really crucial it is that we have them. And this was his quote, which surprised me a little bit. He said, "A parish that does not have a pastoral council and a finance council is not a good parish." That's pretty direct, huh? He says it lacks life. We have to find ways in which we're able to breathe life into our parishes. In just a few weeks, we're going to be closing the holy doors. I was listening on Relevant Radio, and one of the bishops was lamenting the fact, he said, how can it be said that the bishop is closing the doors of mercy, huh? So we have to find a different expression there, huh? But as we're closing those Jubilee doors, maybe that helps, huh? We have to make sure that if we're going to be a credible community, that we're opening all kinds of other doors, huh? So I think that that's going to be important to us. I see I've already talked too much, but just this is one quote from Pope Francis about parishes, and it's also from the Joy of the Gospel, paragraph 28. He says, "The parish is not an outdated institution. Precisely because it possesses great flexibility, it can assume quite different contours depending on the openness and missionary creativity of the pastor and the community. While certainly not the only institution which evangelizes, if the parish proves capable of self-renewal and constant adaptivity, it continues to be the church living in the midst of the homes of her sons and daughters. This presumes that it really is in contact with the homes and the lives of its people, and does not become a useless structure out of touch with people or a self-absorbed group made up of a chosen few. The parish is the presence of the church in a given community, an environment for hearing God's word, for growth in the Christian life, for dialogue, proclamation, charitable outreach, worship, and celebration. In all its activities, the parish encourages and trains its members to be evangelizers. It is a community of communities, a sanctuary where the thirsty come to drink in the midst of their journey, and a center of constant missionary outreach. We must admit, though, that the call to review and renew our parishes has not yet sufficed to bring them nearer to people, to make them environments of living communion and participation, and to make them completely mission-oriented. Now, I know we have to have an ongoing discussion of as we prepare for Bishop Cajano in the spring. And I know that Deacon Mickey and his team are preparing on presenting some questions for our ongoing reflection as we leave here today. But ultimately, I think that paragraph from the Joy of the Gospel is going to be the litmus test for whether our parishes are going to be credible. So that we need to be really looking to see how close are we to those in our community. I was with the Lutheran bishops of Minnesota on Tuesday. Once a year, all the Catholic bishops and the Lutheran bishops get together, and we share some ideas. But one of the questions that they've been asking their parishes is how much they relate to the people in the neighborhood of the parish. Because they have some of the same experience that we do, where neighborhoods change, but the parish stays the same. So that question, I think, is a very real. How close are we to the people in our community? We have to ask if we're self-absorbed. Are we made up of a chosen few? Are we mission-oriented? Are we really going to be involved in constant missionary outreach? Are we training our members to be evangelizers, to serve? Are we really a community of living communion and participation? That question of unity, I think, as well. Are we creating, and I love this expression, are we creating an environment for hearing God's word, for growth in the Christian life, for dialogue, proclamation, charitable outreach, worship, and celebration? That's the standard we have to hold ourselves to. That's the standard that the communities are going to be looking for as well, to see if what we live as we teach. That's the challenge that's before us, my brothers and sisters. I wanted to speak a little bit more about joy. I'll save that for another occasion because my understanding is we need a break. But just know that's how delighted I was to be with you today to share just a little bit of these local reflections, to give you a little bit of local context for the work that you're going to be doing to continue that discussion that Bishop Cajano began last year and that he's going to continue in the spring. May the Lord bless your work. Amen.